And good evening to our fellow followers and listeners. Today is Sunday, January 28th at 8:16 p.m. I'm Federico Lines of States Rights Radio and
Seth Hancock of Seth Hancock Reports.
And Cody Holt with All-In on America.
And tonight's episode, we're introducing Cody. He's our new co-host, and he'll be bringing some great experience and guidance on federal, state, and local politics. And tonight we're going to discuss his experience as a school board member in Illinois, and then we will have a look at our favorite election history and, how some past elections have affected how elections go today. So like I said, we're introducing Cody tonight. He was the school board member in School District U46, which is based in Elgin, Illinois. It's the second largest school district in the state of Illinois. I think one of the common themes for me is that I see that we have no local control, and this is what I've seen from covering local government for over 16, 17 years now. I think your experience might provide some insight on how little control there is. And so just, Cody, if you can just talk a little bit about your experience, just generally on the school board and, just how you felt about the power that you guys had as school board members.
Yeah, and first off, let me just say, Federico and Seth, thanks for, having me. I think we're going to have a very interesting discussion with regards to local government and just America in general. So it was pretty interesting. Actually, I was first elected back in 2015 at the very young age of 23 years old, right? So as soon as I'm out of high school for a few years, I run for local office, and it so happens to be the largest school district in the state that has an elected school board. And I did not actually really kind of know what I was getting into. The joke is when I was elected, I was about probably 40 pounds lighter and had a full head of hair. And if you see me today, it's a starkly different person. If you think the presidency ages somebody after 4 years, you should see what 2 years on a local school board could do to somebody. So, it's a very interesting thing when you get into local government and you kind of do battle against kind of the entrenched bureaucrats, the teachers' unions, and especially if you have a voice that's a little bit different than the traditional orthodoxy from the the educated elite and the intellectuals or the pink-haired Northwestern professors that come out and try to yell at you for having a differing opinion. It could take a toll on somebody. So, I guess kind of like, where would you like to go from there?
Just like I said, I think there's practically no local control anymore, and I think one of the, if I remember right, on an issue like prevailing wage, which I don't know if it's the same in every state, but here in Illinois, there's this prevailing wage law that says that local government, it's effectively a minimum wage, and it's a higher wage than the minimum wage. There should obviously be no government control over minimum wage, but we're so far got down the rabbit hole. But the prevailing wage, I distinctly remember that being something that, and I guess maybe to lay the groundwork on that board election that you were elected in, there were three basically conservatives who were elected. You almost got four in that election. and on a 7-person school board. So it was split basically 4 leftists, 3 conservatives, and some people might dispute the varying degrees of conservatism of at least one of them, but an issue like prevailing wage, I remember there being some questions about if you voted it down, what would you do? And the district said, well, we're still going to follow prevailing wage. So just saying, the school board has no say.
Yeah, no, it's you're 100% correct on that. Actually, to make it very simple, prevailing wage in Illinois is union wage. So, for anybody that we contract out with, they would have to pay essentially what the union pay scale is. So, for example, like somebody mowing the lawn, right? Like if we were going to contract out services for that and take bids, I think the prevailing wage on that was like $25 or $30 an hour or something, right? And that's in line with the union wages. But if there's, I don't know, a small business, or usually actually prevailing wage is a hindrance to the minority community as well, because, they could do, you minority-owned businesses that could do work at substantially less cost, same quality, that can't afford to pay their workers a union wage. And so, we, despite what the school district does with regards to prevailing wage, the district's just going to follow it anyway. So it's just a symbolic vote. And it's a really kind of a silly vote in that, because the state's going to force every single local government to accept those wages. And it's essentially it's a carve-out for all the special interest union groups across the state that elect their politicians. So it's a very circular, it's a very incestuous type of atmosphere in Illinois politics, but it's also kind of like that on a national scale. What do you guys think about that?
Well, I know Illinois and your esteemed overweight governor, Spritzer, he supported a ballot initiative that made Illinois into a truly collective bargaining state. And, I hear you, when you mentioned that, if you have a gardener, but they have to fit into union wages, and those union wages are, $35 an hour. So again, even if it's a private company, he can afford those prices. So yeah, Illinois is very stranglehold by union monopoly, and that's one bad thing about, Illinois is a rich state. It has a lot of industry, it has a lot of commercial aspects in Chicago and all that. But again, when you get that union power, it cripples your state, it cripples your economy, it cripples your people, and nobody really works happy because you get that union harassment. Seth and I, we worked with a pro right to work organization, anti-labor organization, and even though we're not anti-labor, but we've seen the aspects of union coercion, union harassment. And quite frankly, wherever you see a state that has that much union power, the economy is going to be in shambles, because the one that lives better are the union representatives. So I want to ask you a question, Cody. When you were on the school board, did you get that union harassment when you sound like a pretty conservative, free working kind of guy and capitalist kind of guy. Did you get that union coercion in Illinois?
Yes, we got that not only as board members, but also got that individually. So, for example, I remember really the unions, they were very interesting, because when we were on the school board, they would take school board members out to dinner. And, I'm like, fine, I'll go out with you guys. And they know they know exactly where I was on all the issues. And, they try the nice person thing, and, hey, do you remember your bus driver, and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yeah, I liked my bus driver, blah, when I was in school, and we'd have great conversations. I love my teachers. But so they tried that, they tried that angle. And then when that angle didn't work, the nice guy angle, then you get heckled, right? Or you would, I remember there were a few times the teachers union protested outside, like outside of district headquarters during the contract negotiations. There was another instance of when the school district was looking at outsourcing some of our busing to a private corporation, and something, which could save taxpayers millions of dollars annually and still provide a quality, if not better, service. And I was out one day putting up re-election yard signs, and I actually had a bus driver drive by and yell at me, like heckled me from his bus as he's working. So it's a very real thing. If you don't fall into line with organized labor, they will do everything from trying to be your best friend to intimidating you, like the mafia, essentially. And they bully small business people, they bully taxpayers, and they bully politicians that don't want to, toe their line and sell out for them. Which is unfortunate, because there are many great members of the union, right? They're just hardworking people, but the fat cats who control the unions, they never really have to do any work ever. I mean, they just lobby. And I know you guys saw that in Right to Work, and what you guys did, right? Like, have you guys faced that same kind of harassment?
Seth?
I remember, when we were out in the field, people would learn about who we were working for, and you could just feel hatred towards you if people were members of the union. It's just, I guess I didn't. When we were out in the field, we were generally speaking with people who agreed with the candidates that we were supporting, but so we didn't face a whole lot on that front. But I didn't have as much time with Right to Work as Federico had. I don't know if you had more experiences.
I did handle some lobbying activities in Montana and Nevada, and Nevada, I was kind of more scared because they really, had no necks, and they really looked like goons, and that kind of scared me. In Montana, they're a little more friendly because they kind of realized that, Right to Work was not going to pass in that state, so they were very friendly. But once, they know that there's going to be a passage of that law or something that stalls their funding, they will be rude and outright sometimes dangerous. So it's always the union officials that will be more coerced and harassing than the actual worker. The actual worker, the union worker, typically will vote Republican and not Democrat because they're blue-collar workers. And but yet again, even so, the blue-collar worker that's a union worker but will vote Republican, but yet you have the Republican hierarchy, also Democrat hierarchy, go in line accepting union endorsements and all that, and that's where it comes in with federal politics, sending in funds into certain projects into Florida or Illinois that it's union based. And then also within the state government. So, when you have that type of funding, especially in the National Education Association and some Teamsters Union, it's very dangerous. And, DeSantis was, while he was running for president, he accepted the endorsement from the teachers union, from the policemen's union, and he made a big speech in Chicago. So that's why, That's why there's no really a two-party system anymore, because they're all in line on who can give me the big bucks, and I'll just show your support and blah blah blah. But it is an epidemic that national politics has infiltrated into state and into local politics, and who's ever got the green, you got my support. And when I can imagine when you went out to dinner with the union representation, and you didn't want to show in line, they probably says, okay, well, then we're not going to help you. We're going to, stall. We're going to picket you or whatever. And it's quite a hassle. So, I mean, I could see, in your, how many years were you on the school board?
So when I was elected, it was only to a 2-year term. So I served 2 years on the school board before the unions, unfortunately. Just to give you a scope, I raised about $8,000 in small dollar donations for a district that has approximately, I would say, about 250,000 people who live in it, right? So, it's a huge district. Only 10% of those people actually vote, so it's a very small portion in these local elections. But my opponent spent about $42,000 in organized labor money. So that they outspent as an incumbent. So unfortunately, I lost my election. But the people are going to get the government that they voted for, or didn't vote for because they didn't show up.
Yeah, and
right?
that's what happens with PAC money and campaign money, and they'll who's got the green will get the most support. That's really what's the bottom line in today's elections.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll jump in there.
Sure.
And you look at, as Cody said, 10%, and that's a good election year. If you get 10% out for local elections, that's a big number election for local elections. It just kind of shows that, U46 is basically a majority leftist area, but there are pockets that are considered conservative. I personally don't think there are any real conservatives in this country, really, in terms of a big major movement, but that's a debate for another time. But it's a pretty leftist school district, but when you only have a high number a year, 10% coming out to vote, this is one of the things that I hark on is that Washington D.C. is lost. I'm not spending much time at all considering voting for federal elections. But if you focus locally, where nobody shows up to vote, you could actually get people who are ready to stand up against the Leviathan elected. But it's a matter of convincing people that this is where your focus needs to be, is locally, not in the federal election.
Yeah, so 100%. And actually, Seth, just to piggyback on your point, those 10, here in Illinois at least, those 10% of the people who show up dictate the other 90% property tax bill. 100% of your property tax bill is in local government. And 70% of your property tax bill individually goes to school district in the state. So we're a very top-heavy, property tax-reliant entity with regards to the school districts in general. So, if you think about it, you have a small percentage of people dictating the property taxes for the vast majority of people. And in the state that has the highest property tax burden in the country, which is Illinois.
Yeah, that's the things that school board and teachers and that relies more on the tax burden and property taxes and city taxes, state taxes. So I can see Illinois being a burden to the taxpayer on that. And yet again, that's it all comes out of union dues and all that. So it's a very evil cycle that the only ones that are going to suffer is the innocent taxpayer, whether it's federal taxation, state taxation, local taxation, whatever passes. And yet again, because we have an evil amendment to the federal constitution, they can get away with it. Which again, I've said in my second book that states and local counties can do local taxation. It's the federal taxation that I'm against. But one last point I point in the beginning, that Illinois being such a rich state, but being such union stranglehold. I remember that I worked with a very large book printing manufacturing company in Melrose Park, and the owner of the company, very nice guy, he had always been hassled by unions, and they always try to come in and coerce its employees. And he once said that he was thinking about moving his entire company into Indiana. And that's sad, because people don't realize, people don't read, people don't understand that it's the unions that create a weak economy and a slow economy and a recession economy. It's not it used to be the fat cats, the rich fat cats of the industrial age, but then unions saw that opportunity and they took it upon themselves to be those fat cats. And people need to understand that Illinois is losing jobs because of the labor organization and the taxation. It's going up to Wisconsin, it's going to Indiana, it's going to Kentucky, it's going to Iowa. Michigan, unfortunately, repealed their law just recently. Very dumb of them, but what can you do with a Democrat governor and I think Democrat state legislature? But what can you do? But if they keep this up, Illinois will keep losing more jobs and have that weak economy, and we have to expose labor and the politicians in the local, state, and federal that are in bed with labor, because it's really killing your state. And that's and I know I've said this to Seth many times. To me, there's no city like Chicago. I love Illinois. I love Chicago. I mean, I grew up watching Adventures in Babysitting and all that, and I really love, and Ferris Bueller's Day Off. So I love Chicago, and I hate to see such a beautiful city being overrun by unions and all that.
Yeah. And I'll just say we need to have our principles right here too. That there should be no such thing as a public sector union. They should not exist at all. I have a problem with private sector unions, but I also recognize people's rights to organize. But when it comes to public sector, they shouldn't exist. It's just they get to have these backroom deals with administrators to deal with their contracts. The taxpayers aren't at the table. That's something maybe Cody can just touch on briefly, is just, when you guys were negotiating contracts, I know board members had a right to sit in during those negotiations, but you guys weren't really allowed to be a part of it other than your own closed session meeting discussions with the rest of the board.
Yeah, how it used to go would be, the administration would negotiate on behalf of the board, and their reasoning and the rationale for it, and the board majority agreed, obviously, since they were elected by support of labor, that we only can act together as a board when we cast our vote. You can cast a dissenting vote, you can cast an affirmative vote, but in the end, the board acts as one. So we're going to have the administration negotiate on behalf of the board and come back to us and say, this is where negotiations are going. And then we could say that's the right way, that's the wrong way. And really, it's a perfunctory kind of negotiation. Like, they go in, they already know that they're giving a pay increase. Like, that's on the table 100%. They go in with that assumption. Union asks for something ridiculous like 10%. Administration goes 2%, and then they settle at like 3 or 4 or 5%, right? And they're not. It's not even merit based. So it's all kind of a dog and pony show, and that's because state law here and in many other states in the country give that power to organize labor. They give them that power over local government. And to Seth's point, I think ideologically there's people on all sides of the political spectrum that aren't on the take that could agree to ending public sector unions, right? Like, people on the far left would say, yeah, police unions, no, that's terrible. They stand up for their members over an officer who may have violated somebody's constitutional rights. On the right, you would have, well, why do we want these unions negotiating against the taxpayers? They're public servants. So I feel like there can be some bridge building there. As long, the only people who don't want to build that bridge are the people who are on the take from these organizations or part of these organizations, or their livelihood depends on these organizations, right?
Right, yeah. Go ahead, Seth.
Yeah, I was just going to say, agree with that. That the reality is that most people are dependent on this in some form or another. They're dependent on the government. They're dependent on the unions. Nobody wants to be responsible for themselves. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, if I'm a worker in the public sector, I wouldn't want to join a union. I'd want to negotiate on my own behalf, and I'd want to be the best staff member there is. And if I am the best worker, then I should get better pay than the other union rube who's not doing any work and just collecting a paycheck. But people don't want that. People want to be lazy. And the union protects laziness.
They do, yeah. No, you're right. Nowadays, people just want either their union check or their Is everybody okay?
Yeah.
Okay. The union check or their government stimulus check, and that creates union creates laziness. Federal government stimulus checks creates laziness. We even see it in the movies, in the TV series, The Sopranos, where they have these no-show jobs. They create laziness, and they don't create a constructive functioning job workforce. And just to point out what Seth said, public sector employees should not be available, and it's really causing a lot of laziness and a lot of not being very productive. But private sector employees, I do, if the employer wants to bring in the union to have its employees join, that's fine, but you can't be forced to pay dues as a condition of employment. In 2018, the Supreme Court ruled that public sector employees cannot pay dues as a condition of employment anymore based on their First Amendment rights. So at least they got one sector done forth. Now we just have to get the private sector to make that choice, and it's going to be kind of tough in passing a National Right to Work Act to eliminate the National Labor Relations Act. But it does create laziness. It does create less production, less productiveness in the workforce. And it's kind of sad that, like I said, beautiful states like New York, Chicago, Illinois, with Chicago and other cities in Illinois, California, and all that. It's a shame that, that creates a laziness. I just want to point something. When I was in San Francisco with my folks in 2005, and we were waiting for the cable car, that's under the, San Francisco Transportation Authority. And I see this, San Francisco worker taking a nap in his car, waiting for the trolley car to come by, and I'm like, geez, he's a union employee and he takes his breaks when he wants to, and people here, are dying under the sun waiting for the cable car, which is a beautiful ride. But when I saw that, a government worker just lying in his car taking a nap, I'm like, wow, that really does create laziness and just no productive resources available. So it is very sad. So I can see why Cody decided to really take a break from that, because he fought the good fight, but unfortunately they beat him to it. But keep on fighting, Cody, because I know you'll make your mark one day.
Oh yeah, thank you. And actually, funny story. Just kind of piggybacking on your fantasy asked me part of your your comments here. So as soon as they passed that decision giving, public sector unions the right to opt out of paying their union dues, I was actually working in government. I went over to King County government after my school board. I was kind of working in the court system. And I was the very first King County employee. As soon as the decision and the decision was reached by the U.S. Supreme Court to turn in my union membership resignation form. So I always like to brag about that. And of course, the other interesting thing was as the year went on, people heard that I left the union, right? And I had people coming up to me randomly asking for the sheets, like, hey, do you have one of those sheets I can fill out so I can stop paying my union dues? I'm like, yeah, absolutely. Here you go. So it's slow, incremental change, but if you could start to wean people off of that, that notion that this is somehow good for them, and give yourself a pay increase, by the way. That's a pay increase for those workers. Instead of paying their union dues, money back in their pocket. So you start to wean them away from it, and then one day it won't be the orthodoxy just to join a union, right? It'll be, well, what kind of benefit does this bring to me? And they really don't provide a benefit, especially if you can negotiate a better, salary or better benefits for yourself than they can. So they really don't have that purpose.
Yeah, that is quite correct, and a good story. That you're right. It is a pay increase because they get deducted $35 bi-weekly for their union dues, and then the initiation fees are like $50. So yeah, it is a pay increase to them, and good for them that they finally started to read those union workers and say this is enough. I want my money back, and good for them. But then. On our next segment that we'd like to talk about is elections, and we'll bring up some elections that again will have labor union infiltration. But we're gonna go around the table and see. I wanna bring around what is one of your favorite elections to read, and what impact that election made to the country. So Seth, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I think the election, we discussed some of the elections off air, but for me, the election of 1800, the election where Thomas Jefferson won, beat John Adams, this was the election that ultimately led to the 12th Amendment, because ultimately it was Thomas Jefferson and his, I guess you could call him running mate because he's from the same party. They got the same number of electoral votes, and John Adams came in third, and it ultimately went to the U.S. House of Representatives. It went to Congress. This was an election that, I feel like the divisions in America are very strong today. It feels like it's the worst it's ever been. But then you go back and you review history, like the election of 1800, and I can give you a little sampling of some of the attacks of John Adams. He was called a rageful, lying, warmongering fellow, a repulsive pedant, and gross hypocrite who behaved neither like a man nor like a woman, but instead possessed a hideous hermaphroditical character. And then Jefferson, the Adams camp was warning that we would see our wives and daughters the victims of legal prostitution, and Jefferson would create a nation where murder, robbery, rape, adultery, and incest will openly be taught and practiced. So it was when you read some of this and you kind of feel like, okay, maybe it's not as divisive today, but it's just a very interesting election to look at, and the fact that it wound up being Alexander Hamilton who helped get Jefferson elected by the Congress, even though Hamilton hated Jefferson. Jefferson hated Hamilton because Hamilton wanted to create a central bank. Hamilton didn't like Jefferson, didn't like Aaron Burr, didn't like John Adams, but he viewed Jefferson as the least evil of the three. So it was a very interesting election, to say the least.
Okay, yeah, and Alexander Hamilton at the end kind of despised John Adams, and because I think it was the warmongers in the Adams department, Adams cabinet, were all forced to resign because Adams asked for it. So Hamilton was no friend of Adams, but that was an intriguing election. How about you, Cody? What's your favorite election that impacted this country?
For me, it's a little bit more modern, and it comes from more of a political shift and an ideological shift. It's the election in 1964 with Barry Goldwater, Lyndon B. Johnson. As we all know, what we're taught in schools, essentially, Goldwater was an extremist, and Lyndon B. Johnson had one of the greatest landslides of all time. Then they kind of brush over it, right? Like, the Republicans won the South. They didn't really win anywhere else. But there's never the why and what led to Goldwater and what happened after Goldwater. And so he was a very influential person. For me, actually, it was one of the books that shaped my political philosophy, which is Barry Goldwater's Conscience of a Conservative. And, very free market guy, very, very individualistic, loved America, and in '64, obviously, in the GOP convention was held in San Francisco, and you had Goldwater go against Rockefeller for the nomination. Nelson Rockefeller was the epitome of kind of like a, Mitt Romney, John McCain of the day, from the Northeast. I believe he was from Massachusetts, New York. And then you had Goldwater from the West, right? Cowboy hat, chisel jaw, cowboy, just, man's man, and a conservative. And so he took the convention by storm, where he boldly proclaimed that extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice, and that moderation in the pursuit of justice is no virtue. So he won the nomination. He goes on to campaign against Lyndon B. Johnson, where he does lose. And what that led to, though, is the first time that the modern conservative had been the political party's nominee for the Republicans. And I like to say that Goldwater didn't win in '64, but he won in 1980. He led to the rise of Ronald Reagan and the modern conservative movement itself. And it's just a very interesting realignment with people who felt economically disenfranchised. And it was the first time in a long time that you just saw a major shift in the geopolitical landscape in America. And then, of course, it led to Nixon and then Ford, and then Carter, and then ultimately Reagan. But it's just a very interesting thing to look at and see how far we've come, really, since 1964. So that's my personal one. What about you, Federico?
Just to point on his book, The Conscious Conservative. I when I read it, I go, man, this is exactly. He was, conservative, but more than conservative, a constitutionalist. Even with the 6th Amendment, and he still didn't want to do a lot of funding. And so I remember my dad grew up in that era. And when he was in school, everybody kept saying, "Oh, Goldwater's a racist. Goldwater's an extremist." And I bought the book, and I was saying, "Dad, you really got to read this." And my dad says, "No, when I went to school here, they said, Dad, just read it. Just read it. Let me know what you think." Then when he came back, he read it and goes, "You know what? I owe you an apology. this was a great man. I told you. It's not what the media is. The media portrayed him to be a racist, a bigot, a warmonger, and quite the contrary. It was LBJ who ultimately led us to the Vietnam War after he did the Daisy ad commercial. So, it was a change. Yeah. It was a change in aspects, but I would say the impact of the election, which again, Seth has a good point with the election 1900, where that's changed the 12th Amendment, making the VP and the president running mates and changing the aspect of everything. Because I think that was a wrong amendment. Because I think the vice president has to remain separate from the executive branch, being that the VP is president of the Senate. But I would say the election of 1824, and I know we spoke about this offline, because it was a like the election of 1800, it was also a 5-candidate race or 6-candidate race with different candidates. I wouldn't say with different ideas, just different candidates per se. And it wasn't a two-way race. And ultimately, that race, nobody got the majority of the electoral votes, and it went to the U.S. House. Now, of course, you had a little bit of a crybaby in that candidate scenario, Andrew Jackson, that he said, the election was stolen, blah, 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 kind of similar to the antics of 2020. But yet again, that's what's written in the Constitution, is that nobody obtains the majority, then those votes goes to the U.S. House for ballot elections. And ultimately John Quincy Adams convinced the House to vote for him for president, and he won. I may not agree with John Quincy Adams, I may not agree with Joe Biden, but if that was the way of the procedure of the Constitution, then I have to abide by it, because that's what's in the Constitution. And it kind of changed, because I'm very disappointed that 2000, which also had a heavy candidate race of George W. Bush, Al Gore, Pat Buchanan, and Ralph Nader. And again, nobody really. Bush lost the popular vote for Florida, and he lost the national popular vote. But there was nobody really was getting the majority unless Florida called it for the unless Florida, which eventually Florida they called for Bush, but nobody was really winning the electoral votes. I think that that election should have gone to the U.S. House of Representatives, and maybe would have seen a different outcome. Maybe they would have voted for George W. Bush or Al Gore, but the way that they took it up in the courts, that kind of angered me, because as you and Seth are constitutionalists, I'm a constitutionalist, and I think that the way that they did send it up to the courts and trying to invent different type of ballots and all that, the same thing in election 24, it kind of changed the wavelength, and we've seen it recently in 2000, 2008, 2020, and even before then, where they want to always take it up to the courts, and it's not the courts. The Constitution said that the Supreme Court will decide. It's the U.S. House. So I think we need more people. If we didn't have 2000 and it didn't go to the Supreme Court, I say that we would have been in the election of 1824. That kind of shaped the thinking of the mind, where, it kind of, we lost the track of constitutionalism and went into populism. And that's why we started seeing more usage of the courts rather than the legislative process.
Yeah, no, that's actually very interesting. And I'll tell you that there's probably nobody more spineless that aren't willing to make a decision or as indecisive as about 90% of the judges in this country. And really, the Constitution is Constitution. It says what it says. And judges, sometimes, take the activist standpoint where they kind of create procedure, or they create law, or their ruling has an impact over it, when you could just follow the Constitution.
Sorry? Yeah, and it's like we're now seeing the judges being interjected into this election cycle. Things like what's happening in Colorado and Maine, where they're trying to take Trump off the ballot, and then in other, Florida and Texas have suggested they'll take Biden off the ballot. And now we're going to have Supreme Court decisions on this. Elections are run by the state, but it ultimately gets to this, why it becomes so divisive and why people are so they don't care about what the Constitution says, is because we've got a populace that thinks the president is this all-powerful position when president's supposed to be a rather weak position. I mean, if we actually had a government that remained within its constitutional authority, people wouldn't be so worried about the other guy getting elected. Until we start taking this power away from the government, these elections will continue to be like chaotic messes and everybody trying to go to the courts rather than trying to obey the Constitution.
Yeah, and that's what Briggs. You brought up Colorado and Maine, and the courts are falling to what is their electoral code. That Colorado has a right. The state of Colorado has a right to deny anybody from the ballot. I mean, then Judge Gorsuch in Hassan versus Colorado, he dictated that the electoral code in Colorado grants them that, and also the Constitution grants them that with Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2. The states have a right to regulate and set up their standards and procedures. That's the whole point of what happened in Florida in 2000, where the standard of Florida, the voting standard was that you had to punch through the ballot. Well, Dade County and Broward and Palm Beach, they were saying, no, we have to count the dimple chads and the hanging chads. And, hanging chad, it's not a punch-through ballot, so that should not count. I mean, this also thing that, as you saw with the Gord team, that every vote must count. Correct. Every vote must count according to the standard of the state. If you did not follow the standard, I remember when I was voting in Virginia, and the standard of the Virginia ballot was that you have to circle the bubble to make sure the vote will count. If one little thing went off the circle, your vote didn't count. So I had to be extra careful. I had to follow instructions. And one point I want to make is, Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, may she rest in peace, in Bush versus Gore, she said, why can't we see that the voter will understand how to follow instructions, for goodness sakes? Why can't we go to that standard where voters follow instructions? Mailing ballots, punch through the ballot, anything, ballots not including certain candidates. It's ultimately up to the states, not up to the people. That's not left up to the people. It's left up to the states that, they can regulate and enforce their electoral codes. And, I pray to all the gods, my God and every God out there, that Allah, Jehovah and all that the Supreme Court will not hear these cases, because then they will have to overrule Article 2. And then we'll see a different dark age of the federal government really interfering in a sovereign state's rights. Cody, your thoughts?
Oh, yeah. I mean, no, it's like I said, it's just kind of like, There's a lot said there. I'm going to let Seth piggyback on that first.
Sure.
It's in so many ways we've abandoned the Constitution, and nobody really wants to go to the Constitution for guidance. States are the ones who are supposed to manage elections, and it doesn't mean you have to like what a state is doing. I mean, I'm of two minds with what Colorado and Maine are doing, and what Texas and Florida might do if they decide to remove Biden from the ballot. on the one hand, I see the division in our country, and this just furthers the division, which is not good. But on the other hand, I think both Biden and Trump should be precluded from every ballot because they're criminals who took away our rights. But I can't convince anybody of that. I can convince Republicans that Biden's a criminal and shouldn't be on the ballot, but not Trump. And I can convince Democrats that Trump is a criminal and should be removed from the ballot, but not Biden. And that's the sad reality. But like I said, it should be. We should be looking to the Constitution. What does the Constitution say? This is up to the states. The states should run elections, and this goes back to, the 2020 election, and, the madness of it, and what I have a problem with, the way, the pro-Trump people say it was stolen. Well, I'm sorry, you got to go look at what Donald Trump did. Donald Trump didn't attempt to prove that it was stolen. He just said it was stolen. And then he didn't go to the states to get different electors sent to Washington. And so I think it was all a big grift. And, was it stolen? Maybe it was, but Donald Trump didn't do anything to try to prove it was stolen. He just said it was stolen. And that's, it's just, it creates this mess, and, it creates this division, and nobody's focusing on the real important issues. We were locked down. We were called non-essential. I'm more concerned about the loss of my liberties than I am who's going to be the president, because the president is just a puppet of the bureaucratic state. And, everybody's so concerned about their right to vote. Well, I'm concerned about my right to free speech, my right to freedom of religion, freedom of the press, my right to keep and bear arms. Those are what I'm concerned with. But we have become a democracy, and people love democracy more than they love liberty, and that's the problem.
Well, yeah, and that's the talking point, right? Like, and that's the political orthodoxy right now. It's talking point. Defend our democracy, quote unquote, and really, actually, just kind of go back to the issue of who should be on the ballot. It's something that I've struggled with, because I've been actually kind of. I don't know if both of you know this. I've talked about it a few times. I've been kind of one foot in the political waters recently and 1 foot out. Not as focused as I have been over the past decade. And so I haven't really done a lot of deep thinking into, Maine or Colorado's decision. But I guess like my baseline viewpoint is every single state in the union recognizes the existence of political parties, right? So you need to get on a ballot in each one of these states a certain way. And really the only two major political parties are the Republican and Democrat. Then you have the minor parties that have ballot access and in certain areas, or maybe the entire state, libertarian, constitutional. And then it's a lot harder for independents to get on the ballot and things of that nature. Well, since every single state in the union recognizes both of the two major political parties, those parties need to have a way to select who their candidate is going to be in the November election. So how do we do that? It's caucuses or primaries, right? And I think we've also had the discussion before that do we like the idea of taxpayer-funded primaries? Or do we just allow parties and party officials and party voters to get together and select who that candidate will be on the ballot in November? And I think that might be a more prudent way of doing that than having taxpayer-funded partisan primary elections. What do you think, Federico or Seth?
The problem that I have here is that now we have a so-called two-party system that to me
Yeah.
it's like the perfect dictatorship for the United States. That's why I really enjoyed the 1824 election or the 1800 election, where you had multiple candidates, either multiple candidates or multiple political parties seeking their candidates. And the reason why I say it's a perfect dictatorship is because here's another one that I really, this one really just makes me upset. Because the 1992 election, you had a third-party candidate, Ross Perot, which when I was 13, I said, this guy, I didn't quite understand what he's talking about, but I kind of enjoyed listening to him and, even his voice. Can I speak? It's kind of intriguing. And, but I really enjoy his, then later started to know more about Ross Perot in 96. But, after, Ross Perot got a little bit more votes than George Herbert Walker Bush, and of course gave the victory to Bill Clinton. I don't think it triggered enough to go to the U.S. House, but then both parties in '93 got together and booted off third-party or independent candidates from the national stage. So that's why I say it's, Mexico had a perfect dictatorship of a one-party system. This is a perfect dictatorship of a two-party system. And, it's really a two-party system that, honestly, they're both alike. Seth and I spoke in the last segment where Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis were saying, I don't want to touch Social Security. They sound like FDR Democrats. I think Social Security should be capped, and Nikki Haley wants to increase the age. DeSantis wants to decrease it and keep it more for his Florida voters. And it's just, hearing a Democrat protect Social Security, or Cosmo Kramer when he was running for Condon Board's president. I just think that, the right to vote, I'm not denying the right to vote for a citizen. Citizen still has the right to vote. As Seth and I kind of both agree, it is more of a privilege than a right. But yet again, if the states wants to remove the write-in candidate and just, I think they should not remove the write-in candidate, and they should write in Donald Trump if they want to. But if they, it's up to the standards of each individual state, and this is what makes America beautiful. I'm not going to say great, but beautiful is the independence and the individualism of each citizen and each state, that we can say what we want and say what we feel, and with no central autocracy. And that's why I'm not a Trumper and I'm not a Bidenite. I'm for what each sovereign state has. If the state of California wants to permit abortion, yeah, I think abortion is a very evil and kind of despicable form of murder, to kill a child, a baby. But that's up to the majority of the citizens and the state. The same thing as when California in 2008 banned same-sex marriage in Proposition 8, later overturned by the Supreme Court. And then the Supreme Court later legalized same-sex marriage. But yet again, if California wants to ban same-sex marriage, fine by me. Or they want to permit it. Massachusetts wants to permit it. Hey, and Alabama wants to forbid it. It sucks for the people who live there, but it all starts locally. It all starts statewide. We cannot seek federal government influence or privilege, because then that defeats the purpose of federalism. That defeats the purpose of why America was founded on. So, if they want to, I even wrote that if South Carolina wanted to ban Lincoln from their ballots, fine by me. If Pennsylvania wanted to ban John Breckinridge from their ballots, fine by me. It's not like they're going to win those votes. It's their choice. So it's their choice if they want to ban Trump from the ballot. It's the individual liberty that we hold dear.
Yeah, and just go back to the question on how the candidates are selected. George Washington remains my favorite president. For many reasons, ultimately because of his humility, that he didn't want to be king. He warned against the political parties. He warned against the spirit of parties, because it leads to what we have today, where it's just two warring factions that ultimately it's hard to distinguish the difference between the two. they both want the power and control of government, and I want the power and control to be in people's hands to control their own lives and their own destiny. And ultimately, the Republicans and Democrats, they force the taxpayers to pay for their system to decide who their candidates are. And so if you've decided to let the taxpayers be the ones who have to pay for your elections, and you have to accept that the states can interject and say, well, this person's kicked off the ballot. If you were like the third parties, like the libertarians, they decide on their candidates at their own conventions, their own state conventions, their national conventions, and the taxpayers don't fund a single dime. And yet they're the ones who have, the third parties are the ones that have the hardest time getting ballot access, and nobody's worrying about that. They're all worried that a Republican or a Democrat might not have ballot access, and that's a threat to democracy. But they've been for decades. Really, 1992 was the end of third-party candidacies of having any type of chance. And the third parties who don't force the taxpayers to select their candidates, they are the ones that have the hardest time getting ballot access, and nobody cares about that. That's not a threat to democracy, I guess, but it all underlines the bigger point that I raised earlier, is that voting is not this ultimate right to me. I would gladly give up my right to vote if I knew that my freedom of speech and my right to keep and bear arms were protected and defended. I mean, we've got to take the power away from these people. The power should be in our hands. And if it were that case, if the government were in its proper constitutional size, we wouldn't put such importance in who the president is. Doesn't matter who the president is to me. It's up to us to run our own lives, and if we have an authoritarian president, defy them. When they tell you to do something that they don't have authority to tell you to do, you don't have to do it. But unfortunately, we've kind of lost that independent spirit in America.
Yeah, and to piggyback on Federico's point with the parties colluding after the election of 92. Is it 92?
Yeah, 92.
Yeah, 92. That's one of the reasons. Personally, I've been an active and very partisan Republican for about the past decade. And just recently, I left the party to become an independent voter, and that's really because I not only saw the corruption that occurred within the party on a national level, but on our state and our county level, and really, and piggybacking also on Seth's point, kind of the detriment that being just a two-party system has on our government when they collude with each other, and it's really just kind of a uniparty system of insiders and nameless people in gray suits and red and blue ties. It's not healthy for the foundations of our republic, and they keep crossing that line of government interfering in the economy, which causes the economy to interfere in government, and it just creates this downward spiral of corruption. And it's all part of the entire system that we've been talking about for the segment, whether it's organized labor, whether or not it's the parties colluding with each other, or creating legislation that's beneficial for donors and campaign contributions. It's all tied in together. And it just kind of harkens back to the fact that there's only two major political parties. And I guess the question is, how do you create that incremental change to start to get people to move away from the idea that it's a two-party state, it's always going to be two-party, and start to think about voting independent, voting for new party candidates. Personally, I'm a huge fan of the UK Parliament with, 10 different political parties, right, creating coalition governments, and even independents over there too, because I think it gives more voice to more people, and there's less of the system of corruption that's been perpetuated for the past century.
Yeah, no, and that's I know offline we spoke. You spoke about proportional representation in the UK and in certain Latin American countries and even other European and even Asian countries where they have multiple parties and they join coalitions together. My main concern is that there's two major political parties, but yet even the small political parties like the Libertarian Party, Reform Party, Green Party, all those parties, regardless if it's from the left or the right, their main objective, and that's what I kind of saw when I was kind of searching if I want to vote for Gary Johnson, is that they were looking for, federal assistance, federal aid, somehow increase the federal government. Gary Johnson wanted to, of course, end the DEA, but yet create a national act of marijuana usage. And even I spoke to a governor candidate in Indiana from the Libertarian Party where, my main objective is that, the states have a right to enforce immigration and not the federal government. His response was that, no, that's not how it's supposed to be. And, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, now you've seen it now in these debates on the Republican side and on the Democrat side where they're all kind of just want to increase the size of the federal government, whether through defense, Nikki Haley, or through police, DeSantis and Trump, or social services, Biden and Dean Phillips and Robert Kennedy. So they all want and they all want to increase the size of the federal government. So that's why on national elections, I've taken the stand that I'm done. I'm not voting for anybody because that's it's not the job of the federal government to be increased like that. Whether social services or police usage and increased police activity or social, like I said, social services or free drugs and all that. It's not the role of the federal government. So I'm taking a stand that if I can't find a political party that reduces the size of the federal government and puts on top the state and local level, then no, I'm not going to vote for my U.S. Senator. I'm not going to vote for my congressional representation. I'm not going to vote for president. I'll just stick locally. I know said that, vote for your local sheriff because that's where the power is. And yeah, he does have some power. He does have a point to that. So, it's very difficult when it's a two-party system or one-party system that you really have no voice. And it's a shame that and even the other parties that are very small, but yet they have the same thinking as Republican and Democrats. So you say to yourself, what's the point then? If they want to increase the federal government through defense or social services or whatever, or police activity or law enforcement activity, I mean, what is the difference between DeSantis and Trump or, Nikki Haley and Dean Phillips or Biden or Robert Kennedy Jr.? So my main conclusion in all this is, look deeply and see if this election really is for you. And if it is, hey, knock yourself out. But for me, hashtag abstain 2024. That's my motto. So that will be, my advice to all of you is, look deep inside and see if these candidates are really for you or just a populist big mouth trying to bring more money into your state and your pocket, my money into your pocket and all that. So my conclusion is hashtag abstain 2024.
Yeah, I don't think the problem is we're on the precipice of the U.S. dollar crumbling. and the economy is going to go to hell at some point. It's just a matter of time. We're in so much debt, and I don't think there's any fixing the problems before just total utter collapse. It's a matter of preparing for that and being ready to fight to start the system anew with a more independent mind behind the system. And going back to George Washington's warning about the spirit of party, but ultimately, locally, if you get local and state level people who are ready to resist unconstitutional edicts and dictates from the federal government, and local and state leaders who are willing to say, we don't want the bribe of the federal money. We want you to stop stealing our money in the first place. That's where you can actually have some real impact and change in what's going on today. And that's why, like I've said many times, the sheriff might be the most important position in that, if you have a good sheriff, they can protect you from these dictates more than any other position. And in fact, the U.S. Legal code actually says that it is a felony for politicians and bureaucrats to deprive Americans of their rights. So if you have a real good sheriff, they can even arrest your mayor. They can arrest bureaucrats who are telling you have to wear a face mask when there's no law that says that you have to wear a face mask. So that's where you can protect your rights and protect your liberties best in terms of elections. But more importantly than even thinking local elections, think locally in your own life and how you can better your own life. Ultimately, your life is your life. You are responsible for it, and you can whine and complain about the politicians and the bureaucrats destroying your life. Well, you're actually the one destroying your own life. You've got to make your life better and stand up when your rights are being violated. Know your rights and use your rights. But that's the ultimate. When I say think locally, yeah, it might include voting for some people on local elections, but when I say think locally, I'm talking about the most local, and that's the individual. You can make your life better despite all the madness that's going on around you. You don't need these politicians to make your life better. You can make your life better on your own. So that's the best thing that we could do, is making our own lives better on our own without government on a daily basis.
Yeah, it's and the upcoming election. What I'm a huge fan of, and I may feel a little bit differently with regards to voting. I do plan on voting in the next presidential election, and the one thing I will say that I like about Donald Trump, and I'm sure I could get some disagreement on it, is I feel like he's somebody who has shifted a conversation. It's another political shift, right, in America. And he's brought different people to the table to listen to Republican ideals or even conservative ideals, or who might be more open to it than it would have been with like a Mitt Romney or a John McCain trying to speak to those people. And maybe because he understands the culture, or how to, hyper partisanize elections and use the sound bites and the memes and everything like that. But what I found is when you bring more people to the table, will they be more willing to open that Barry Goldwater book, right? Are they going to be more willing to listen to an idea that challenges their own orthodoxy And I think you've seen that, and it's a very interesting realignment that I think he's done in this country that open up more doors with people. And I'm with you guys on the whole fact the president, nor Congress people really, or senators, they don't really impact our day-to-day lives, right? Like the local government is where it's at. It has the most direct impact on our life. And to Seth's point, the sheriff, quite frankly, might be the most powerful position. Heck, I might even want to run for sheriff and go down to U46 and lock up some of those bureaucrats. But with that being said, to have somebody who's very visible, right, talking about the hot button issues of the day, or playing on the cultural issues, I think it's an interesting way to maybe get people to start talking economics. He's brought people into the conservative movement who are socially conservative, right? But economically liberal. Like they like their welfare systems or their Social Security. So it's like, okay, now we got their ear. How do we convince them to start making those incremental changes, just in case we don't have that great reset, right? Just in case the dollar doesn't collapse and everything goes to hell. Well, how do you start to talk to these people to shift their thoughts on the welfare state? And I think to have their ears to put new ideas in their head, I think that's a very valuable thing.
No, it is. You're right, and it is valuable to have this open discussion. And here, Seth and Cody and myself, there is no right or wrong answer. We have to have these open discussion debates, and we may agree to disagree because, again, that's why I love this country very much, because we have that idea that we need to debate things in the open, and we may disagree in certain things, and it's our choice to disagree and all that. So I mean, that's the beauty of this country, and I'm glad this allows us to have this podcast, you and me and Seth, to discuss these debates and bring forth ideas and alert the American people, alert followers and listeners and other individuals to see what we can come up with. And that being said, hope Cody will join us as a co-host, and Seth as well, and we'll discuss other issues. Matter of fact, Cody, it's been very intriguing and insightful, and Seth as always. So hope you will consider joining us, being a part of the team, and bring forth ideas.
Yeah, no, thank you both for having me. And Federico, I think this is the second or third time that we've spoken to each other, but I feel like we vibe very well. We have great conversations. You're obviously very well versed in just about every aspect of policy. And Seth and I have known each other for a long time. He covered me on the school board, so it's been a very, very, very good conversation and interesting, and I'm just so thankful to be here. So thank you both.
Great. And with that note, we will see all of us next Sunday, 8:30 Eastern Standard Time, Central 7:30 p.m. And have a great night and week ahead, Seth and Cody.
Good night. Good night.